hello, and today we are looking at our fourth principle, and that principle is genre. And that word sounds very interesting. It sounds like you might go to Club Dada and talk about the genre of literature or films that you're in, but it really is not that complicated of an issue. A genre just means a type. And so what genres do for us when we're reading scripture is it really helps us to understand more clearly what the author of scripture is trying to communicate, the human author, and more importantly, God, as he's speaking through that human author. So there's so many different types of genres. When we're thinking about literature and literary genres in the Bible, we have narratives, we have law that just tell us this is what you do and this is what you don't do. The narratives tell us stories, of course. And then you have prophecy that's spoken in oracles. It's a very different type of writing, and poetry. We have apocalyptic literature that is just way far out there with all of the images. And so there are all these different genres that inform how we're supposed to understand. How literal are we supposed to take this? How figurative is it supposed to be? How do we take these images? Are they real life images that we expect to see this real life dragon rising out of a sea? Or is it maybe supposed to be symbolic of something else? And figuring out what kind of genre we're reading helps us to figure that out. So as we're looking at genres, we're looking specifically today at the genre of prophecy, because that is what Habakkuk is written in. But a lot of these books of prophecy, Isaiah, Jeremiah, they're a very specific sort of literature that you don't just find everywhere. What is very particular about prophecy is that it's written in oracles, number one, and so it's not necessarily chronological. Sometimes it is, but not always. And so you don't just read one oracle and say, this is what happens, and then what happens next, like you would in a narrative, because this is a different genre. You read the oracles in the sets that they come in or by themselves, and you have to determine how you read them in context. It's not necessarily continuous as you read through the text. And what is prophecy, though? A prophecy is written by a prophet of God, and it's not just about telling the future. A lot of people think, oh, it's prophecy. It's all about the future. No, not necessarily. That's not the primary job of the prophet. The job of the prophet is to speak to God's people as God's mediator between God and them. And so God gives the prophet a message. The prophet speaks it to the people in a particular context. And as he's doing this, what he's primarily doing as he's speaking to God's people is specifically applying God's law to the people of Israel and other nations, applying that law to them. And in the law, there's cursings and there's blessings, depending on whether you're breaking God's law or you're keeping God's law. And so as we read the prophets, we want to read these things specifically while also recognizing that they are foretelling the future doom of Israel so often in the prophetic literature. So as we see these folks that are in the prophetic literature, we see these folks that are actually applying God's law, the prophets applying God's law to God's people. We want to remember things like Deuteronomy 28, where it says, if you keep my law, you will have these blessings in the land. You'll have food. You'll have wonderful blessings. And we'll see images of that in the prophets. And it'll also say, hey, if you don't keep my law in Deuteronomy 28, for instance, then God says he's going to send blessings. He's going to remove them from the land. And that is exactly what most of the prophets are predicting will happen in the future. There's so much to these prophets. There's a lot of poetry and imagery. But as we read them, we work through those and we see a bigger picture too as we're reading the prophets. Not just what's coming right ahead, but there is judgment, yes, but hope in the future. And so we want to look at, yes, the big judgment and understand that we need to be aware of sin and how the prophets are convicting God's people of sin. But we also look for that great hope of what is still to come as the prophets lead us forward to Christ and our future hope in him. That's prophecy. Enjoy reading this literature. It's beautiful.